What's the story, everyone? Welcome back to Gaelic Games Fan TV. How are we all getting on? How is the form? So, Tyrone 23 points, Dublin 16 points, Donegal 126, Monaghan 120. This is going to be a match reaction, a bit of a different match reaction as you'll see here, not in the usual setup. I am away on a lovely holiday at the moment in Ljubljana, Slovenia, but despite all that, look, we're going to discuss both of the games very, very briefly. I did watch them and everything else, thankfully. Thank God for GA Plus. You get to watch it on the mobile phone. I couldn't find anywhere to actually watch the games. I mean, to be fair, you wouldn't expect to probably get GA anywhere here. But look, yeah, as a Dublin fan, it is a little bit disappointing that we've lost the game. It does feel a little bit weird, maybe because I'm enjoying the holiday and everything else. I'm not as disappointed as what it should be. The game also went the way that I expected it to go. I expected Tyrone to win the game. I didn't expect it to be a 7-point game in the end, and it probably wasn't a 7-point game. You know, I think the scoreline I predicted was Tyrone 217, Dublin 117. You know, coincidentally, Tyrone do finish with a total of 23 points, but it's not the, you know, it's not the goals that brought them up there. But it was just the same old for Dublin, really. It was poor shooting, bad passing, bad decision making, not starting Con, which is obviously a big one, really. Not starting Con O'Callaghan. Obviously had a bit of an injury, kind of had to force him on in the second half in the end. And yeah, we just struggled. Our inability to kick 2-pointers, I think, caught up with us. Like, we didn't want to take the chances on. We didn't want to take the risks. And it was a weird kind of first half, because in that first half, you know, Tyrone showed, you know, an abundance of quality with 2-pointers. You know, the likes of Darren McCurry kicking 2-pointers. He was absolutely outstanding. Peter Hart scored an absolute, corker at one point as well. And we really struggled in those moments. We struggled to kind of create chances, to create opportunities. And we were just so wasteful, whereas Tyrone were far more clinical. And in the end, that was what led them to have a 1-point lead. And you're kind of thinking at half time, like, Dublin should be further ahead, like, should be ahead here at half time. Tyrone are a point up at half time. Dublin should be the ones that are ahead. We had chances, we had opportunities, but we couldn't take them. Dominating the ball, but not doing enough with it, in my opinion, and that was, you know, the problem as well. And yeah, you're kind of thinking in the second half, you know, Tyrone aren't going to be as poor as that. Tyrone aren't going to be as bad on kickouts and everything else, and they're going to be the ones that are going to be able to take the opportunities, to take the chances. And they kind of were, to be fair. You know, they were far more better in the second half in the end. Bringing Owen McElhone off the bench made a big impact. I think they kicked like 4 points off their bench in the end. And we struggled, I think, to create opportunities with players coming off the bench. Con O'Callaghan comes on, but doesn't look right. And I think in the end, it's, you know, the game has gone the way we sort of expected it to as a Dublin fan. I thought Tyrone would win comfortable enough. It probably was a little bit more comfortable towards the end. I think Dublin kind of lost their heads a little bit towards the end, giving away a lot of silly frees. We couldn't win any kickouts, and it became a lot more dominant than it was. You know, it was 2 points going into the final, kind of 4 or 5 minutes, and then, you know, it stretches out to be a 7-point game in the end. And yeah, look, Dessie Farrell has since stepped down as Dublin manager, which I think was expected, really. It was the final year of his term. There was a lot of murmurings that he was going to go, so it's probably not that big of a surprise, in all honesty, that he has stepped away, that he has stepped down. Big question will be now, who comes in? Will it be Ger Brennan? I think that's the name on most people's radars. Will he leave Louth? Will he come to Dublin? It's going to be interesting to see. It is interesting, though. Dublin have often, especially in the last kind of 10-15 years, gone more internally, gone with people who've been managing the under-20s, like as Dessie has been, as Jim Gavin has been. You know, Ger Brennan hasn't been involved within Dublin setups probably since he was a player, so that's going to be interesting to see whether they do go for Jared Brennan. I think that's why they tried to get Declan Darcy in the past. But yeah, it's disappointing that we've lost the game, but it's not the end of the world, I don't think. It was expected, it was an expected loss, an expected defeat, and look, ultimately you have to congratulate Tyrone, who, in my opinion, still have another level to go up on, still have another gear that they can reach, and I think that's what makes them still quite dangerous going into the semi-finals. The other game was Donegal 126, Monaghan 120 points. That was a bit of a bizarre game as well, wasn't it? Because you're kind of looking at it and thinking, Jesus, Monaghan, completely wiping the floor with Donegal in the first half. To be 6 points up at half time was nothing short of remarkable, really. Being 6 points up, and you're kind of thinking, like, this is an absolute walk in the park for Monaghan. All the kind of built-in excuses and everything else, all the kind of chatter and talk before the game about high turnover and everything else that's kind of gone with it. And Donegal were struggling in that kind of regard. They couldn't win any of their own kick-outs. Sean Patton was having an absolute disaster of a game. He was really, really struggling. And Donegal just looked miles and miles off the pace, didn't they? They didn't really look like they were in the game. They were struggling in more ways than one. And Monaghan were taking advantage. Rory Beggan was absolutely brilliant. He was outstanding, kicking some absolutely brilliant 2-pointers and everything else. And then he also, as well, you had Conor McCarthy, who kicked some brilliant points, Andrew Woods as well. And yeah, it was, you were kind of thinking, Jesus, like, Monaghan are 7 points up at half time. They probably should be further in front. They should be further in front. They've been so dominant. They've been absolutely brilliant in more ways than one. To be 7 points up at half time, and you're kind of thinking, right, Donegal are up against it here going into the second half. Like, how are they going to be able to find a bit more within them and everything else? Like Kieran Thompson with some brilliant 2-pointers, keeping them in the game. Oisin Gallen was very bright as well, but in the second half, they stood up, and I think that's been the most impressive thing about Donegal this year, is that in the second half of these games, they've had to stood up, they've had to kind of get the result and get the win, and kind of show what they're made of. They did something similar, I think, versus Louth in the second half, where they probably weren't at the races in the first half, and then they stood up and kind of get the job done. Paddy McBurty coming on, making a big impact. Micheál Langan was absolutely brilliant as well with his goal. And it was brilliant from Donegal to have the energy to sort of step it up and turn it around in that second half. Was absolutely huge. And for Monaghan, though, they'll be absolutely kicking themselves. Just completely miles off it, I think, in the second half. To only kick 5 points. I think 1 2-pointer in that second half right towards the end of the game. Everything that they did right in the first half, they struggled in the second. And Donegal were able to kind of step it up and turn it around in that kind of aspect as well. So you'd be disappointed if you're a Monaghan fan to have a lead like that, a 7-point lead, and then a 13-point swing essentially. Very disappointing there from a Monaghan perspective, and it probably kind of funny, all the talks about legs falling off and all that kind of crack, and in the end it was Monaghan whose legs probably fell off in the end, which I did find a little bit ironic. But look, it's probably one of them things for Monaghan where they haven't played enough teams at this level this year. Playing in Division 2, having a much easier group stage than the group that they had, or the likes of Donegal and some other teams. So I think going into that final quarter, they hadn't been in that kind of situation enough. They hadn't been in those kind of moments enough. So it probably wasn't that big of a surprise maybe to see kind of how it ended up. But yeah, Donegal get the win. They're into the semis. Everyone who's in the semi at this stage is a contender. Everyone who's left in the All-Ireland series is a contender, including the 2 games today. They're both contenders as well. But yeah, great turnaround from a Donegal perspective. Well, yeah, that's the video. Anyway, you'll see here the hotel is right beside a hospital, so this has been a very interesting video to make. You won't believe some of the things I've actually seen while I've been standing here. But yeah, look, fair play to Dublin, or fair play to Tyrone for getting over the line. I think fair play to Donegal as well for turning it around. As I was saying, 7 points down at half time, and then to come back and win it in the end by 6, I think shows a tremendous amount of bottling. Look, for us Dublin fans, we've been spoiled with success down the years. We've had it all, so it's not as painful as the defeat last year. It's not as painful as other defeats. I've seen the writing on the wall coming for a long time. And to think as well, like ultimately between 2015 to 2024, Dublin lost 3 championship games, 21, 22 and 24. This year we've lost 3 championship games alone. Do you know what I mean? You can't, and you look at a lot of the defeats, they've all been kind of very similar. Do you know what I mean? A lot of poor shooting, not taking chances, not executing opportunities. And ultimately that kind of thing just comes back to haunt you, in my opinion. It really does. So look, fair play in the end for both of those two. Be interesting to see what happens today. We'll record another video like this tomorrow, so that should be fun to speak about yeah, Galway versus Meath and Kerry versus Armagh. So yeah, anyone who has tuned in, hit the like button and subscribe. Appreciate all the recent comments, new subscribers and everything else. We will get back to the usual kind of familiar setup. Hopefully later in the week. We will later in the week, barring anything disastrous. But anyway, until then, speak to you all soon. Enjoy.